Pax Baltica. Well, that ended a lot quicker than I expected it would. Sudden death victory. And it was kind of a surprising one. The rules led me, and I said this in the wrap, the player's notes led me to believe that it would be difficult to get an automatic victory against the coalition. Well, it seemed pretty easy to me in the sense that I had them on the ropes a couple of times where it was close to the automatic victory, whereas Sweden was never in any kind of real risk. Now, obviously, the longer the game goes, the harder it's going to get on Sweden, and their best chance for it is fairly early in the game. But I was under the impression it would be pretty difficult to do. And that, with me cheating against Sweden, on the first turn of the game, the Swedes got kind of, I don't know, everybody got a jump on the Swedes. Well, they absolutely shouldn't. There's a special rule where the Swedes are supposed to get an automatic roll of 5, and they will win all ties as to who goes first, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but that automatic roll of 5 means they wouldn't be affected as they were by an event roll on the first turn of the game and unable to really prosecute the war. I'm okay with it, you know, and certainly, you know, that was a penalty for the Swedes overall, so. All right. So what about the game? Well, first of all, it is a block game, and I'm not a big fan of block games. They come with a lot of baggage that I don't like, and, you know, they have their fans who like these things. For one thing, there's the components, which I find mechanically somewhat complex to cope with. There's the unknown, to me, decision that on all block games, for whatever reason, they seem to want to put them on this cardstock shit that, you know, and as I was playing, the Russian end of the board was all bent and warped. It just does not sit evenly. And if you got to put plexiglass on top of something, well, why isn't it the cheapest material you can possibly, you know, print, basically, if it comes to that? And that's how I feel about these block games, is too often the boards that they're using, these cardstock boards, just don't lay flat. Now, I could backfold the shit out of this, lay books on top of it, and if I play it enough, it would eventually lay flatter, I think. If I play it enough and keep laying things on it, maybe not. Backfolding not on the corners is dangerous. It can end up breaking the board a little bit, and, you know, that's very unpleasant. So anyway, that's a big minus, just in terms of the presentation. The rule book, I found, left a few things ambiguous. And of course, maybe I just missed them, but I looked. And, you know, there was at least one thing that I found in the playbook that I couldn't find in the rule book, in terms of, in the example of play, that I couldn't find an answer for clearly in the rule book. There might be all the answers are in the playbook, but, I mean, let's see. A lot of this is historical notes, which I find useful, especially on a war like this, that, you know, your average, I know as much about it as I do about anything, basically, but your average war gamer may not know anywhere near as much about the Great Northern War as they do about, you know, topics that are more popularly covered. But to me, this is a prize situation to be looking at. But let's see, we've got page 14 back to page 6. So we got like 8 pages of extended example of play. It wouldn't take, you know, that much to make the rules nailed down a little bit tighter. Although I'm not one in favor of trying to spell everything out in the rules, I feel like some of the ambiguities in this are ones where, I'm just left with, yep, I don't know. And that's okay. I mean, it doesn't bother me. The thing that bothers me the most is, hey, this is a modern GMT game. It probably is spelled out somewhere, and I just have to find it. So I feel more stressed and more need to go looking through the rules again and again for the thing. Whereas, if this was an old SPI game or an Avalon Hill game, I would say, yeah, they probably screwed something up. That's fine. Where it's not is in the errata. None of the clarifications that I particularly needed were in there. But yeah. The other play aid, these, which I think are really useful. First of all, they give you a summary of the basic rules. Not every little thing, obviously, but a lot of the base things that if you're playing for the first time and you need to look something up in an opposed game, it's easier than paging through the rule book. And then they give what's really important is the per country rules. A lot of the specific rules that are special are contained in there. The core system is actually pretty simple. Not surprising for a block game. I like the competitive action rolls. That throws a lot of variability into the game, where you don't know who's going to go first. It's kind of like the old victory game, Civil War game. And the difference is that those rolls aren't going to give you approximately the same capabilities. They give you a variance, not just in terms of, who gets to do what first, which can be just as big, but at least in that game, but also how much she gets to do, which is kind of a big deal. If you end up getting an event at a key point, you could just be hosed. You could end up losing the game based on that because you didn't get to move something, because you counted on, well, I'll probably get to move at least one stack of units, right? Usually it only takes one stack to prevent you from losing the game, but to some extent you can just plan for that and not do things. Make sure that you aren't uncovering a possibility of losing the game, but then that weakens the choices that you have available, and that may end up losing you the game more slowly by playing cautiously and carefully. The actual actions break down into a few different things. Reconnaissance, which is kind of I don't know what the other guy's got, let me look, which probably in games that I would play opposed would be used most often for, oh shit, I got no idea what's there anymore. I knew what was there, but I don't know now. It probably wouldn't get used much, though. For the most part, it would be kind of I don't care. I know I'm good. What difference is it going to make? I'm not going to waste an action. I'll see during the battle I can run away if I'm Sweden. If I'm not, well, oops. Movement, which allows you to trigger movement from one territory into apparently a whole bunch of them. Siege declaration, if you're already located in a space, you can declare a siege that way. If you move into an empty space, you can declare a siege too. National politics, which lets you roll on the little random tables back here, one of them, maybe more, depending on how lucky you get. And then basically the two big ones are movement. Siege can happen, but usually you're not stuck in needing to use it. And replacements. The fifth one is replacements, which allows you to shift one of your kind of in-supply blocks and get one extra pip on that block. And you can do that multiple times. So if you don't have a lot to do and you've taken some losses, that's a pretty good option. If there's things you really need to do, then you're forced to make decisions. Do you reinforce yourself? Do you do movement? The others generally less desirable. One thing, with this reconnaissance action and the blocks, I've played the game more or less open. I mean, I didn't paw through the other guy's stacks and calculate exactly. You don't have to. It's not an odds-based CRT. It's this sort of die roll thing. You kind of know the capabilities of most of the armies. Yeah, the Russians have some serious variability between their armies at times. But the blocks that you're facing, you more or less know what you're going to be dealing with. It's not that big a deal not to know, and I found it's not that big a deal to know, which is to say you could strip away the fog of war aspect entirely, and this would still be a fine game, I think. Certainly for block game lovers especially, that fog of war element's kind of a big deal, but it doesn't serve as big a purpose in this as it does in a couple of the others that I've played, where a lot of the game was really trying to bluff your opponent in terms of where you place your pieces, and how big is that block? Geez, I don't know if I can take it. You'll still have some of it though. There's no question. It's just it looks like it holds water pretty well without that. So then, after both players have used all their actions, basically the guy who rolls the higher number of actions has to move all his pieces first, do his actions first. Then the other guy has to do them. Then you take care of battles and sieges. And if you win the battles, you get a chance to spread out. And then there's a forage phase where you have to meet your stacking limitations, basically. For the battle phase itself, there's a fair amount of little things that are a little different than maybe you're used to in a block game. For example, if you come in, from different territories, or if you reinforce with units even through the same border, you're not available for the first round of combat. And I think that's pretty... See, it reflects something that happened during the era, but I don't know how well it really represents the whole concept of troops arriving as reinforcements for a battle. But we're not looking for a really, really detailed simulation, especially at the operational level or lower. It's hard to tell what a battle is in this game. Is it just a couple of days of fighting, or is it a few hours of fighting, or is it an operational campaign in that area? Maybe one, maybe the other at different times in the game. The actual battle, so the pieces have some interesting. They have an interesting amount of detail on them. Different things that distinguish them, and you'll have to forgive me if Hammer of the Scots has all this, and I'm just excited about it because this is the first place that I've seen it, and I suspect that's the case given what they talk about here. But first of all, you have a differentiation between armies and regiments, where armies are the only ones who can effectively siege, and they can kind of drag an extra regiment with them because they have extra supplies that work for that, so you can bulk out your force in the forage limitations by adding some, that's probably new to this, by adding some smaller units. Now those smaller units, you would say, oh, well, they probably suck. Yeah, they're kind of interesting because, first of all, they have strength point pips, which are the same as the strength point pips on armies, except they cost less to replenish. Then they have a movement allowance, which might be faster than the armies. But the combat value is basically combat quality is basically referred to with two values. One is a letter, which is how early in the combat round you get to act. And the second is a number, which is your target number. So you could have slow acting but very powerful firing units. You don't see much of this, but you do see fast acting but unlikely to hit units in some of the regiments, for example, where they're kind of elite small units that aren't likely to do a lot of damage, but if they do, they kind of get that first shot in. You know, it's just kind of cool. So there's a lot of capability to differentiate between the different units. That design is kind of nifty, I have to say, but it adds a bit to the mental mechanical burden, because you have to do a lot of counting in your head, dividing up the dice, what you're going to roll, and I'm not sure how much is added to it. And what it does is it kind of forces you into the block game, or at least something that contains more information than like a couple of different kinds of units in a strength point game. Okay. Now I keep finding myself arguing that games should use generic strength points, and I'm not sure I agree with that across the board with all things. Don't get that idea from me. However, the mechanical aspects of dealing with these blocks with their pips, and the different points, the different values in them, and all the mental mechanical of counting it up when you're using a buckets of dice type situation. That's where it starts to cause me issues. Is I'm just doing too many mechanical and mental counting type activities that kind of frustrate me. They're very prone to error. Now, this game isn't trying to be a really detailed and careful simulation, which means if you bump a block and, oh look, it went from a 1 to a 4, you know, and you don't remember how that happened, or whatever it turned, you know, it may not be that big a deal, as opposed to the 45 that I was looking at, which you feel like they were not really trying to make a great deal of effort in making the combat system all that detailed, but they put a lot of effort into the detail of certain aspects of it, and you know, then took a representation of this kind of rotating counters type thing, which is far worse than rotating blocks, but a similar concept in mind and easy enough to knock things out. How did it all? Oh, and then so you have these event tables, which can be triggered either by a random die roll, or you can kind of trigger onto the national politics table, which is generally positive for you, by spending one of your activations. And finally, you have political, not really operations or anything like that, but political rules for each of the different countries where they come in and out during the interphase period. The interphase period, you buy new units. There's a little bit of randomness to that. You might save up points. You may have points for new units, and then leave yourself a couple of points for new units, and then not be able to use them because of the way that you randomly draw new units. Or you might accidentally get a navy instead of an army, or whatever. You might not get what you're expecting, is what it comes down to. But basically, each country has this replacement point level, and that's how many points that they can spend on replacing both onboard units that are in supply, or building new units at home. The Swedes are affected by a limitation where the more armies that they lose, the worse their situation becomes politically in the game, and also economically in terms of their own country. What else? I don't remember. Anyway, how does it all hang together in terms of playing? It gives me a feel for the era. I don't feel like I'm playing a detailed game. I mean, I kind of want to see a Red Sash treatment of this war, especially after the War of the Hats. I want one that takes this on, which is much, much more, you know, really having trouble with words today, am I not? there's a lot more different weird things going on in the Great Northern War than the War of the Hats. There are a couple of little things, but they're pretty scripted in there. Of course, maybe Red Sash isn't the right company to take this on. This covers a lot of that kind of weirdness in it. What it doesn't really catch is it really kind of fails to give you a deep military view of the situation at all. Now, a deep military view might be hard to come to, in part because sometimes it's very, the designer at least, and I don't feel like I have any better answer to it, and I don't know if historians in general feel like they do. It's very hard to kind of understand what the fuck Charles XII thought he was doing. I mean, here he is. Operationally, he was brilliant. Tactically, maybe even better. Strategically, you felt like he's kind of blundering around, wandering all over Europe without any real pointed goal and without any real understanding of where the power politics lie and what he could get done in Sweden. Sort of, I mean, if you look at an Gustavus Adolphus, it felt not too different in some ways, but at least Adolphus kind of limited his goals in a lot of ways, but he kind of blundered around a bit too, in a similar sort of way. And hey, he got a lot out of it, so maybe he took the Adolphus strategy. Let's just do things, do impressive things, glorious things, and good will come of it. Yeah, well, good didn't come of it, and Sweden historically lost their overseas empire for the most part during this period, during this war. Anyway, given the lack of treatments on it, this is one of very few games where you have the opportunity to look at this in isolation. Other options that give you a chance, EU, Europa Universalis, has a scenario on the Great Northern War. It also has a campaign that covers the whole era, kind of the Sun King era, really. And you have Sweden, as the major power coming out of the 30 Years' War, and the Great Northern War is a part of that, obviously. But so are the Spanish Succession and the wars, the War of the Grand Alliance that we looked at. So that's one option for it. I don't know that I would really strongly suggest buying. See, the thing is, the scenarios in EU, they don't require as big an investment in terms of your mental energy and your effort and everything to play. So if they give you nice little war games, not really detailed ones, but nice little ones, in some ways less than this, in some ways more than this, nice little ones that cover different slices of the history. Another option is Grand Sequel, which basically covers the 18th century as a whole. May start a little earlier and end a little earlier, but it covers it, in the European theater with, so that you'd be able, in both cases, the campaign for EU for the era, or Grand Sequel, you'd be able to deal with the diplomatic underpinnings and some of the reasons why things are happening the way they are in that period. On the other hand, both of them are you're standing back a lot further. Even though there might be more detail on the strategic level, you're standing back a lot further to look at more of the world, etc. So in this case, you're in a lot of ways facing results of your military actions that have to do a lot more with, hey, trying to maneuver within the die rolls you get to position yourself so that you can take that advantage and maybe get the automatic win, or best position yourself so that you can survive the game, say as Sweden, without losing much of your territory so you can get a win, or to chip away at the enemy's territory so you think you can get a win. A lot of these type of things where you're looking for little advantages that you can get through the game, but mainly by kind of taking advantage of maybe a couple good die rolls in terms of sequencing. There's a fair amount of luck in this. There definitely is. If one person's lucky and the other person's unlucky, it's all over no matter what. There's hard decisions where you feel like, oh geez, if I do this, then I'm opening this up for them. No matter what, you're kind of leaving a blank spot where the enemy can move into, or you're weak spread out all over and the enemy can concentrate against you. Of course, then he's leaving weak spots, but you never think that way. You're always thinking of your own weaknesses, I guess. And that's a nice feel. I like. Sometimes I like being challenged and having to think that way. Anyway, overall, I'm pretty glad of it. I would certainly play it opposed. I don't know how much solo play anything's going to get anymore. Just because so many damn things. So many damn things. I mean, seriously, with this ending as short as it did, I kind of feel like I should play it again. Except, I don't feel like there's all that much I'm going to learn about what the game's not going to teach me much more about the era. And I don't feel like the game's kind of failing to do something, but maybe that's more me. Like when I looked at 9 years and played it twice, that was because, wow, that was over quick. What did I do? And, maybe this suffers from the same problem for me to play, which is that I'm just, too willing to take risks as the coalition or something. Too willing to take risks as anybody, but, Charles XII, man, you got to take risks with him, right? And that definitely got in my way in the 9 years in terms of, and probably No Peace Without Spain as well, in terms of like just being too aggressive, too willing to chance, hey, maybe I can win the whole game on a couple of die rolls, but then maybe I'd lose it if I don't win those die rolls, kind of feeling. And I may have been too willing to risk things. However, it feels pretty, it feels tough in the sense that, like, the other guys, in the game that I was playing, the Swedes were basically chipping away the coalition in a methodical sort of way, and also putting themselves in a position where they weren't far from being able to grab, and get an automatic victory. And I kind of don't know if that's pretty standard, in which case the game may be, it may be a game that the early part of the game is that way, and then once the Swedes go past a certain tipping point, it's much harder for them to keep fighting at the same level. But I don't know. When games have that kind of tipping point, it feels kind of funny. It's like it feels like, oh yeah, I'm doing all kind of great stuff now, and then no, well that's the game for me. now I'm just sitting back and losing everything, kind of like Victory in the Pacific, and I don't mind that, but at least it allows, as long as you get past that tipping point, both players to kind of get to experience both sides of the situation, which I guess is kind of an advantage for a lot of people. Anyway, it's pretty good. Defies some of my expectations of block games, in the sense that, yeah, you get rid of the fog of war, and I think you still got a pretty interesting game here. It seems to have a lot more color in terms of, the nations coming in, all these kind of random event charts, all that stuff, that is pleasing to me in a way that usually I feel like block games are kind of bland to me. Maybe I'm just missing out on all the modern ones. Maybe those old Columbia ones, have soured me forever. The other problem, of course, with block games is I'm paying, not in this case, thank you. Yeah, this was a gift. But I'm paying an overhead for these nice wooden pieces that don't particularly do a lot for me. And this is one, though, that I think is probably worth going for, even if you're not a big fan of block games, especially if you like the Great Northern War. Because there ain't a lot out there. All right, let's end up.